Check 1 2. Testing 1 2. 2 2. Mic check. Testing 1 2. Under throw cut. I'm Ray Abshire, and I'm from Vermilion Parish. I was born in '51, and born into a musical family. There was always music. The Abshire family has a history of breeding Cajun musicians, and I was very fortunate to have been born into that. I managed to catch the tail end of what is now referred to as the dance hall era, which was basically after World War II and went on in through the mid-70s. And was friends with quite a few of the old pioneer artists that most students study today. I had several friends in particular: Amade Bro, naturally Nathan, on the accordion side, Okta Clark, but in particular fiddle players. I was always very fortunate to have been surrounded by really great Cajun fiddle players, and some that are very well known and some that no one's ever heard of. Musicians such as Will Kegley. He was a really great Cajun fiddler, and he played 25 years with cousin Nathan with the Pine Grove Boys, and he was a tremendous fiddle player. But like most musicians, if you don't record, you tend to be forgotten. Another great fiddler, in fact the first band I played with was with Mr. Lionel Lilla. He also made fiddles, and he was a great fiddle player, and he did very little recording, so he's not very well known, but he was a tremendous fiddle player. I was friends with Robert Bertrand. He's well known. He was a great vocalist and fiddle player. Dewey Balfa is tremendous fiddle player and very well known. He's probably the most famous fiddle player to come out of Louisiana, Cajun music. And as I said, I've just been really lucky to have been friends with these guys and catch them in their peak when they were really making music, writing music, and it's the style that I grew up with, listening to, and it's the style that I've tried to remain true to. Back then we were basically the only venues you had in the 60s and 50s were these large dance halls, and that's why it's called the dance hall era. It's no longer here with us. There's a couple of remaining clubs that are here, but back then on Saturday night, that was the big night, and everyone went to these dance halls in South Louisiana. And there was very little competition for the entertainment dollar back then. You didn't have gambling, you didn't have a whole lot of television going on, you didn't have bowling alleys, a few movie houses, but these dance halls were it, and that, I think, is where, in my opinion, where Cajun music peaked, where the rhythm and syncopation really mellowed out for the dancers, and it's, to me, when it really was the most beautiful. I grew up, don't remember when I first started playing, actually, because it was always there, and we used to have house parties all the time. And it's in one of these house parties that I met Mr. Lionel Lilla, and I was a teenager then, and he asked if I would like to start playing professionally. At that time he was playing at this old club. It was called the Old Spanish Trail, or the OST, in Rain, and it was a hot club. It was run by Mr. and Mrs. Joe Latour. And we played there one Saturday night, and opposite Alice Roger. He was real hot back then at that era. And we played there for a few years, and then Mr. Lionel's wife died, and I started playing with Robert Bertrand. And we played at various spots. Some of the old clubs, Hollywood Club, Rainbow Club. We had the Reno Club for a little while, but it burnt down. And also at that period I would play with Will Kegley. Uh, with Will, we played the dance halls, but we also played a lot of juke joints. The Cajun music wasn't commercialized back then, and it wasn't really that popular outside of Southwest Louisiana. You almost had to be a member of a musical family or friends or living in that area to really get involved with it. You didn't have it on the radio to speak of until in the 60s. Jerry Dugas started playing on Saturday mornings, and you had Reuben Reed and Mamu at Fred's on Saturday morning. But other than that, the only place you would hear it was on jukeboxes and these saloons and juke joints. And back then, Cajun music, if you were a Cajun musician, well, you were in certain circles you weren't very well thought of, but maybe it's because they didn't understand the music. We played some pretty rough joints, and but it's where it was. If you were serious about it and you wanted to learn the trade, you followed the music. You had to follow the marketplace, and that's where I learned to play Cajun music with these really great pioneers, and was very fortunate that they took me under their wing. They were very generous. Back then they shared their music. There was not a whole lot of competition going on. Everyone had their own style, so they weren't worried about that. If you could drive up to a club and you're out in the parking lot, and within a few minutes, a few notes, you could tell if it was Nathan or if it was Austin or if it was Alice or if it was Lawrence by their style, by the tune of their accordion. Back then, a few miles was a long distance. Logistics were it's not like today. There's not instant knowledge. These young musicians coming up can hear a particular tune by 20 different artists in 4 different keys just by going to one of the record shops or going to the internet. Back then, if you wanted to learn a tune, you had to drive to where that musician was playing. Some of your followers would go up to the bandstand and it would say, have you heard Austin's G number or Nathan's G number? Can you? Well, Nathan I spent a lot of time with Nathan, but the other artists that I would see on occasionally, I would have to just go where they were playing, and you'd have to ask them to play that tune for you, and you'd have to put it in your head, and then you'd start playing it as part of your repertoire. Unless by chance you'd hear it on Saturday morning at one of those 2 programs. So it wasn't instant knowledge back then, but because of that, the music was very flavorful and distinct. And everybody had their own followings. Lawrence Walker had a huge following, Nathan had his following, Ari. Everybody had their own followers that liked the way they played, and it was very distinct. I don't think, in my opinion, in 1974, when Barry put together the first Festival Acadien, where we played at Blackham Coliseum for the Cajun Music Tribute, that's really the first time that we all got together on the one roof and played for the general public. As I said earlier, the places we played in, you wouldn't take your small children, and if you really weren't into Cajun music, you just didn't go. There were saloons, there were dance halls, but when we got together that historic Saturday night and played for the listening public and the general public, and if I'm not mistaken, that night about 12,000 people showed up. That's when the gates opened, and in my personal opinion, that's when its commercialization set in. The restaurants started wanting to have Cajun music. A lot of light bulbs went off, and they said, hey, there's something here. It's a big part of this culture, not just the food, but the music and the dancing, and that's really when it started getting out of the gates. But it changed. It changed, and the music started changing. And that particular era, the dancehall era, is no longer with us. And a lot of people today, I find, play very similar to one another. That's not bad. But when I was growing up, everyone had their own distinct sound, and I found that really, really interesting.
Just that right there.
One thing you have to understand, when these pioneer artists recorded back then for the first time, these songs that are now being re-released, that's just a small snapshot of the, you know, that particular night, that particular recording session. I'm here to tell you, they sang it like that maybe that night, and that was it. The next night in the dance hall or somewhere else, it was different words, different feeling, maybe even a different tempo. It's just so that this is not Mozart we're talking about.
Exactly.
And I go to some of these camps, and they say, well, you're not saying it right. And you'd be real nice and you just nod and you don't say anything, but gee, so many of these songs you know, you hear them on the record, but you were there the next night when he was singing it somewhere else, and it was just totally different, and depending on the crowd, how he was feeling, how many drinks you had. But it's just not, it's a folk music, and you play what you feel, you sing what you feel, what's going on in your life at that time, and that's what a lot of people really don't understand. And they would play it differently. You know, there's their own songs that they wrote would evolve. They would start playing it one way, and then they would change over the years. I would notice they were playing it differently. It just, their expression changed. You know, the way they played, their whole style. You know, you're a musician. You know, your style changes as you go. So they would hear it differently, and they would express it differently. So there is no standard time for Cajun music. It's how you feel. Yeah, it's you have to be careful, Wilson.
Yeah.
You saw what happened to country and western music. If we're not careful, it's going to end up just like that. We're going to. This is a strong word. This is a strong word. But if we start prostituting ourselves to sound like we're supposed to sound to mass audiences and the general public, what they think we've lost it. You have to be true to yourself in the music. That's all I'm going to say. You've got to be true. You cannot be influenced by these outsiders. They're too concerned about making that fancy, precise note at the right time. That's not it. So what if you mess up? Jesus.
Exactly.
Just play, man. Just,
maybe they don't feel it. Huh?
They don't feel it.
I guess, and some people say, well, they didn't grow up with it.
That's the biggest handicap. Biggest disadvantage of all these kids that come here for lessons, or when they haven't listened and been with this music long enough. It's not in them. If it's not in you, it ain't coming out.
If you can't spell the word, don't buy a typewriter.
If you can't speak in French, don't try to type in French. They haven't been with the music long enough, and I'm talking about years and years. I was raised next to a dance hall, and that drum beat, that rhythm's been with me since I was. Give you a good example. David Lang and his wife stayed with us a while back, and he's been coming to Louisiana for 25 years. Best friends I have. And he's the first to admit, he says, I just don't feel like it. So we sit here that night, we cook supper, and we're playing music. And we start playing, and my little 2-year-old granddaughter jumps out that chair, comes in here, and starts dancing. And I said, David, stop. He said, why? I said, there's your answer. He said, what do you mean? She's 2 years old, and she's listening and dancing to Cajun music. That's what you didn't do. That's why you can't express yourself like we do. He said, my God, that's the answer. She was right there tapping her feet, keeping it, and 2 years old and dancing to Cajun music. She has it in her.
Exactly.
That's Brent's daughter.
She's already 2.
She's 2 in January. She's not quite 2 years old. Wow. She loves Cajun music, and she hears it a lot with her daddy.
Exactly.
When she's here.
Exactly. You grow up with it. You can't help it now. It's in you.
And that's the biggest hand. And you see this too, Wilson. You see that when they come out in these classrooms and start bringing sheet music and button number 3, 7, and 10, and I'm gone. I can't. I don't know.
Exactly.
I tried something a few months back when I went to Denmark. I gave a class one day, and they were from all over. And the same, so finally I said, okay. I said, quit looking at what I'm doing, and everybody close your eyes. Just close your eyes. And then I said, some of them could barely speak English. Close your eyes. They all closed their eyes. And I started playing this waltz. And I said, just listen to the waltz. Just listen, listen, listen. And find yourself on the keyboard. I don't care if you mess up. And you know what? About 7 minutes later, they picked up on the tempo. it was starting to get a little rhythm, and we started sounding like, and we were blending. It was in unison. And they all had their eyes closed. But with their eyes open, they were so busy.
Trying to watch your fingers and trying to mimic that, yeah.
It's not that. It's right here.
No.
It's right there. And they got so much out of that, and they thanked me for that. And we stopped. I said, we're not doing it anymore. I call it folk music, same thing. That's what I was talking about earlier, is folk music.
Describe what folk music is one more time.
I just think it's real music. It's music of everyday life.
Yeah,
It's everyday
people.
life, people. You know,
But,
it's
I
folk
mean,
music.
What is it saying?
Life's experiences, the way you feel, you know. It's just the way you express yourself, you know, and that's why you listen to the recordings, they're fine, but you very seldom play the same way twice. It depends what's going on when you play, you know. You notice that you might play one way one night, and the next night it's a different situation, and it just comes out different.
Yeah.
It's real music.
You might be upset, you might be happy.
Yeah,
It's
you
all
might.
kinds of different, yeah.
Right. It's just a different crowd, an older crowd, a younger crowd. It just, you have to pick up on what's happening, grasp that the moment, interpret it in your music. It's just it's real music. You know, it's, like I told you, it's not Mozart. And if you're singing and playing the same way every time, I'm afraid you've missed the boat. I think you missed it. I think one reason the music got so sweet and so mellow in that particular era was that you were playing for dancers, and really good dancers. And if you didn't have the rhythm and syncopation, if you didn't have it just right, you would lose your job, because there were some great musicians back then. I find today the musicians coming up are, technically speaking, are better. There's some kids today playing several instruments in any key you want them to play. They're, mechanically speaking, they're tremendous. But the trade-off I find is they're not playing with feeling. There's something missing there. They're just not playing with their hearts anymore. In the old days, you'd see musicians crying on the bandstand because, you know, it was their music. They were playing what they were living, and it was just different. And you were playing with these dancers. The dancers every now and then would break down. You know, you play something that they would remember, that associate with, that something happened in their life. It was just different. Today, in the venues that you have, festivals, restaurants, and all, it's just different. It's good, but it's different. And in these old dance halls, you had your followings, and you would see these people every Saturday night. It got to where you knew them very well, and sometimes they would invite you to their homes for special occasions, and it was just it was a really good situation. I think the festivals, because of the first tribute to Cajun music, that's when they started, you really got these music festivals started going down here. When they saw the number of people that showed up and the money that could be made, in my opinion, that's when it really kicked off, when you started having these Cajun music festivals. And another thing it did, back then it was very, very segregated. And the whites played in the white clubs, and the colored played in the colored clubs. And we used to call it la-la music back then. And you would never see or play with or associate with the Creole musicians, and there were a lot of good ones. We would see Clifton Chenier occasionally, because he was up front, and we did some festivals when I was with the Balfour Brothers. We did some festivals at Clifton, but the other guys you would never see. But that night we were all there, and Bosek was there, and Clifton, and we got to spend some time together. And I think another good thing that came out of that, the first tribute, was the kinship, and we realized that we were all from basically the same culture. We had, our music was a little different, but we were there to play for dancers, and we really, the music is pretty close. And when the festival started, and it really started integrating, and you started having Cajun bands, Zydeco, now they call it Zydeco bands, and today it's just totally different. It's just not the same. But there were so many things that happened that particular night that, number one, it brought it out to the general public and made a lot of people realize that there was money to be made with this Cajun music. and that the two musics that were very, had a lot in common, and it was just a great night. After I left, I knew the Boffer brothers for many years because of my association with Nathan, and when Nathan became ill in late 60s, I was asked by the Boffer brothers to join their band, and they were one of the first ones out the gate playing this music outside of Louisiana, and I just happened to, it's I guess just lucky timing. I just happened to be there at the right time, and I didn't realize it, but when Mr. Dewey called me, he was, I like to say now, he was offering me a scholarship to join one of the greatest institutions in the world to learn traditional Cajun music. And I didn't realize that for many, many years, but I was very, very fortunate to be put in that position. And my first response was, well, I had been playing professionally for quite some time, but I had also played with these guys and listened to them just occasionally, and I knew they were on another level of play. And my first response was, well, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. But in his typical response, don't worry about it, we'll teach you. And that's how the musicians were back then. So they were very, very generous, and we started traveling, and I was fortunate to have been with them on some of these early trips. And what I found fascinating back then, what people don't realize, when we arrived at a location, whether the Northeast or Midwest, it was a situation, it wasn't only that they had never seen us or heard us play as a group, they had never heard Cajun music. It was a new experience for both sides. We weren't used to playing for these crowds and the academia and what have you. And we come out of these smoky dance halls and with this music that's in many circles had never been heard. And Ralph Rensselaer and some of these guys came in and persuaded Dewey and the brothers and some other groups to go and some of these folk festivals. But it was very interesting because at first it was kind of a standoff. They would look at you on stage and look at the instruments you brought, and you could see on their face, no, this is not going to work. And you were looking at them sitting there real straight-laced and stiff, and you were thinking, this ain't going to work. We'd start playing, and after 2 or 3 tunes, and things would start to loosen up, and you'd see them all of a sudden they'd start tapping. And the rhythm of the Cajun music would grab them. And 2 or 3 more tunes, and they would start hollering. When you'd holler, they would holler. And by the end of the set, you had them dancing in the halls. And you knew some of these people that probably never got up to dance before, but it just grabbed them. And that's when Dewey and the brothers really realized that we had something special. And that was just fascinating to me. I was real young, but it was, I could see some of this going on, and it was just, it was a very, very interesting period for Cajun music. And it was, like I say, fresh and out the gates. And now you travel, and people have heard Cajun music, they've heard Cajun bands, it's just a different scene altogether. But back then it was very interesting. And it was interesting to see how the crowd would break down, and eventually they would just grab this rhythm and syncopation and beat, and they'd go with it. They just start clapping and hollering for more. I started playing with them in 69 to 75. And I quite honestly don't remember my first.
And Nathan had stopped playing with him at the time?
Yeah, he was pretty sick. Yeah, this cirrhosis came back and got him. Yes. Nathan and I were second cousins. He was one of the most recorded Cajun artists at that time, and used to spend quite a bit of time with him. He lived in Basile at the time. He and I were both raised in the same area there in Vermilion Parish, near a little community called Riceville, but he was a lot older than I was. And then Quincy Davis hired him to play at the Avalon Club 7 nights a week. So he and Ola took off, and so I would see him a lot in the summer, during summer breaks. And as I got older and finally got a driver's license, I would go to his dances. He had quite a following. He was just, I don't think Nathan ever met a stranger. He was that kind of guy. He was just a very likable guy, and he was a showman. He could really put on a show, and recorded a lot of great stuff. It's a lot of good original stuff. In 1965, I was at his house in Brazil, and we were sitting down visiting and playing a few tunes, and he got up from his chair, and then I played a few tunes, and he said, "It's time. I want to give you something." So he went in his bedroom and he came out with his old Monarch accordion, the one that he recorded, the original Pine Grove Blues, which was his signature song from Gabriel Kaplan Moss, and he gave it to me, and he was just. And I didn't realize it, but I guess at that time he was just kind of passing the torch on. He knew he was getting older and wanted to keep it in the family. And again, I didn't really appreciate that a whole lot till now. It's in the family now. My youngest son has it, and it still plays. It's a great old accordion.
It's like Swiss cheese. I've seen it.
Yeah, it's got a nice sound, but it's I played with the Balfour Brothers until 1975, and then my plate got really full. I had a family starting off, had help raise, and just starting to work. As it is now, you could not make a living playing music in Southwest Louisiana, and I started working in the oil and gas industry, and that's 24/7. So I had to give something up, and it was extremely difficult, if you can imagine. Walking away from the Balfour Brothers, it was tough, and the rest is legend. Where they went, they really turned into some great ambassadors of Cajun music and the world renowned. I was gone for about approximately 20 years. Didn't play a whole lot, just maybe for family and friends, and re-emerged, I suppose, in the mid-90s. Had some musician friends started coming home, and I started to have more free time on my hands, and realized that I'd never lost the love of the music, and started off very slowly, just helping out various bands, and when the news got out I was back in the loop. I started getting calls, and to this day I'm still freelance, and I don't care to have a band and commit to certain venues every week, every weekend. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. I get to play with a lot of musicians, and I'm getting to do a lot of great festivals. I'm starting to travel out of the United States. I've done a few jobs in Europe, and it's just great. It's a lot of fun. I'm enjoying some of the music camps. When I started playing again, one thing I noticed there was a void. The music that I grew up with, our music is a folk music, and the core instruments, fiddle, guitar, and accordion, when played acoustically, it's just beautiful. And I saw at some of these festivals that it just wasn't there anymore. A lot of percussion, electric bass, a lot of sounds coming at you that are fine, but that sweet, mellow acoustic sound was gone. So I've tried to remain true to it, and when I travel, when I play, I don't travel with drums or electric bass, and I try to keep the core instruments. I love twin fiddles. I've always been in love with the fiddles. My style, I think, comes more from fiddle than it does from accordion. I try to blend with the fiddles. I always, as I said, had these great fiddle friends, and I was always listening to those fiddles, always listening. And my style is a little different from most in that I think it's closer to the fiddles than it is to the accordion players. It's just the way I hear the music and interpret it, and we all hear it differently. But if I can travel with some good twin fiddles and a good open key rhythm guitar, man, I'm happy. It's really all you want. And you can make a lot of noise and a lot of music with 3 or 4 instruments, and I'm just trying to remain true to that and myself. And I miss some work because of that. I get calls and they tell me what I should have, and I don't go because it's not the sound that I enjoy. There's certain privileges, I guess, with old age. You can kind of pick and choose and do what you want to. and I don't do it for a living, but I'm enjoying it just like it is, and there's some tremendous musicians today. Some of these young men have studied authentic traditional Cajun music, and they know how to do it. And I'm just, once again, very fortunate that I can come back and still be involved with these kind of musicians. It's kind of like someone wrote a while back that I've been able to swim the river twice. And that's not often you can do that. Just kind of pick up where you left off and find these musicians that are wanting to still play in that style. And I just feel so very fortunate. And we're hoping that along the way some of these other young boys will lock onto this sound and say, hey, I like this, I want to play more of this. Just try to keep it alive. And there are other musicians out there doing it too. I'm not the only one, don't get me wrong, but there was a void there when I got back into it, and I think now there's a slight resurgence. We're getting invited to a lot of big festivals, and you can see a lot of people just sit back and just kind of, when they hear that sweet traditional acoustic sound, it's just a beautiful sound. And I just enjoy it thoroughly, and it's just fascinating to see the talent out there today. It's just, well, there's some young musicians that really make you listen. They're good. They're very good. Where it goes from here, I don't know. As long as I'm enjoying it, I'm going to stay playing in public. I'm going to try not to let it become too big of a pull. You have to, there's a thin line there, and you have to be careful, because if you get too serious about it, and there's always a trade-off. There's always an opposite reaction to anything you do, so you have to be careful not to let it take over. And that's one thing I saw happen to a lot of my old friends. It took over, and that's another story. But it can happen in music or anything else. You have to be careful. You have to balance things out, and I've been fortunate so far. I've been able to do that. I'm really glad I'm back in. Don't regret getting out. It's something I had to do, and I'm glad I did it. It's just placing priorities, but it's really good to be back. I'm enjoying this a whole lot. It's really good. Good. Had so many of my friends back then that actually lost it. They lost their families. They lost their health, and the music actually took control, and the lifestyle that came with the music. And it's not just Cajun music. This can happen with any musician. And that's the thing, that's the part that's tricky, is to be disciplined with it. Now, I know you've been on the road enough, you know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
And that's when you have to give it some serious thought. Nathan called me from the payphone there at the Bearcat, and he was crying. He told me what had happened to Ray. Ray got really heavy into drugs, broke into a drugstore. And so I drove to Appaloosa, bailed him out, brought him here to Lafayette, and got him a job, and he lived with me for about 3 months. And wife and I went out to eat one night, and we came back, and I walked in, he was passed out on the floor, and there was glass all over. He had walked down the street, gotten a fifth of whiskey, and he just... So I picked it all up, cleaned him up, brought him back to Basile. And
stay here.
He just... Now he's burnt out. I don't know if you know him. He doesn't even recognize me when he's in a little bitty one-room trailer in Basile in somebody's backyard, and he's just fried. He just doesn't know who he is. But anyway, dropped him off with Ola, and I drove. Nathan was playing with the Mamu hour with Reeve and Reed. I drove to Mamu, and when I walked in, Nathan saw me, and he knew something was wrong, and he just tears started. He knew that Ray didn't make it, and he just thanked me. Said, you tried. Thank you. But it just went downhill from there. So
his wife died, but then of course, then finally...
He lost his son first, fell off a pickup truck. Then he had a brother killed right out here. He was a welder, welding on a valve, and there was pressure on the line. Didn't know it at the time. The valve hit him in the head and killed him. Then his wife got trichinosis. We used to have these boucheries at Dewey's house, and the ladies would make sausage, and they would season this raw pork, and they would taste it for seasoning. She gets trichinosis. First case in 100 years. She dies. And then the day Will and Rodney got killed in Bunkie, just one thing after another. And
then it continues. Then finally, just when you think it can't get worse, what happens to him?
It's cancer. It was, but it's in his music. It does.
You can definitely hear the singing. Right?
And Nathan, bless his heart, he just couldn't say no. And it turned him into an alcoholic, and he had an episode of, he almost died, and then he got off the bottle. What many people don't realize, he was straight for about, well, when he made some really good music, French blues, Bayou Teche, when he was playing Sydney's D. They had J.W. Pelsier on the steel. Boy, they made some music. He was straight. And he had this little black, I've got it in my closet, this little coffee bottle. It's dark. We used to call them patassas, these little pints he'd put, but it was coffee. Mm-hmm. Well, I would make him some strong coffee. And boy, he'd take, and everybody knew, what you drinking, Nate? And I do coffee. And they'd laugh and holler, but it was coffee.
It's just coffee.
It was coffee. And don't put this on the record, but he went to Chicago with Dewey and Rodney. When they got back from that trip, and Rodney and Dewey says, T-Ray, he used to call me T-Ray, he says, oh, we messed up, we messed up. I said, what happened? He said, we went in a hotel room in Chicago, and Rodney loved his Schlitz, you know, and Dewey did too. We drank a lot of Schlitz. He said, we kept begging, they used to call him Payos. He said, Payos, have a beer with us, Payos. And he said, Monet, he drank that first beer, and he said, that was it. He was drunk for the rest of it. He couldn't quit. And it started all over again. And he was drunk. Cirrhosis of the liver came back, swelled up, died. It took a few years for it to happen, mm-hmm. But on that, don't repeat this, because I don't think even Christine knows this, but Dewey felt so bad about that. They just were egging him on, and it ended up getting him. They didn't realize that an alcoholic, after all those years, takes that first.
It takes one sip.
And he wasn't.
You'd have to say what?
You ready?
Yeah.
A little more with the Balfour Brothers. When I travel today, fly these music camps and just different spots, the West Coast, and you still hear, you can tell that they've studied and listened to their music, because you hear that sound come out in the fiddles. I can be at someone's home, staying with someone during one of these trips, and they'll invite musicians over from that area, and you start playing and you start hearing the old friends in the instruments. You start hearing a little bit of Dewey, you hear a little bit of Dennis, McGee, every now and then you might hear Lionel, you hear other accordion players playing, and recently a trip I took to Europe, I heard a lot of Nathan. And it's like they're alive in the music. You still hear them, and I can still hear them, especially the fiddles. I hear Dewey a lot everywhere I go, so they're still alive. You know, they're still, you hear them everywhere you go. That's something else that I find fascinating since I'm back in the music. It's one of the experiences that I've been having. And I also find when you leave Louisiana now and you go to other places, I find that the audiences and the musicians that you meet are much more traditional. They're playing music that they studied, and it's like they're locked on to the traditional stuff. It's not as progressive as it is here. I find that sometimes I'm more comfortable playing out of state, because of you can tell us what they want, and it's what they enjoy, and it's what they want to hear, and they make requests for songs that. They request songs that you haven't played for years and years. Over here, people just, you don't get these requests. Exactly. They want to hear the stuff that's going on right now. And when you leave Louisiana, you start getting requests. A song you may not have played 20, 30 years, but it's something that they heard on an old recording, and that they want to hear, and they know that you were there and you can play it, so they want you to play it. So that's real. That's a lot of enjoyment in that. You never know when you leave what they're going to be requesting. You get some really interesting stuff.
Exactly. It's true. Out of state, they seem to appreciate those more. They seem to know their own music.
Absolutely, and I enjoy that a lot. And like I said, we get called some of these places. Boy, they say, man, we've got this is a big dance group, and you know, without the drums, I don't think it's going to work. And you just have to say, trust me, and dancers should dance to rhythm. You know, if you need the drums to dance, that's okay, but you don't need.
Yeah.
If you hear the rhythm, you can dance.
The open guitar, those twin fiddles.
You got to have that rhythm and its syncopation, we get on stage and everything's just fine. The dancers have a great night, we have a great night, but these promoters and club owners are, for some reason, just think that you've got to have all this percussion, and I'm not knocking it, it's just not me.
That's what, I'm a drummer, but
Yeah.
I travel, like we did a gig in San Antonio, I just brought a cymbal and a snare drum.
Yep.
And they're like, where's your set?
Yep.
I'm like,
Yep. And there's some good drummers today, there's some that,
But wasn't it the drum that defined sort of the dance hall stuff?
well, the dance
it's a
halls were
different
so
type of-
big, yeah, but it was different. Those drummers were different. They didn't show up with $3,000 worth of drums.
Yeah, they
You
call it
know.
the rice pump drum.
Can you talk about the
Yeah.
the
Back then in the dance halls, when you got out the households in the dance hall, that's when the amplification started, because these halls were so big. You're talking some of these halls, 400 and 500 people. They were huge halls, so you had to have amplification. And it was right after the swing period, and there were drums, but the drum playing was different then, and the sets of drums, as I said earlier, the drum players didn't show up with $3,000 worth of drums. They showed up with a couple of pieces. A lot of drummers were using brushes. I know my old friend Octa Clark had a drummer, a fine drummer, Rex Champagne. I played with him for quite a while. He always played with brushes. Octa wouldn't let him use the sticks. They just didn't want the competition of them. And it was just fine. It was just there to, it's not an upfront. It never should be upfront, in my opinion. Like the basses, I like an acoustic. I like a bull bass. But it's just to hold up the bottom. It shouldn't be a lead instrument or up front. It just should be, you slap those notes, keep everybody honest, just hold up the bottom. And I like that, and sometimes you need it at these festivals. I tend to find that you have a big problem with your sound mixers. Your sound men have a hard time with Cajun music. And you have to really almost plead with them if you have an upright bass to just keep it down, keep it behind us. And I find that they tend to mic you pretty bright on these stages, so sometimes it's good to have an upright acoustic bass.
I'm interested in when they started introducing drums into the music. Do you know anything about that?
Well, in the households it wasn't there. When we played house parties, and now it's called fade. Tell you what, these house parties were nothing more than, today it's called a jam session. When we had house parties back then, it was just a jam session with a meal. But the difference was, it wasn't open to the general public. Our jam sessions, when I was growing up, was for family and friends, by invitation only. Today they have jam sessions all over the place. Here in Lafayette, you probably could go to a jam session every night, but they're open to the general public, so they're no longer called house parties, as they finally refer to as fedodos. You didn't have drums in the households. You might have a culiar, someone playing the spoons. Occasionally you might have someone playing the bones, or triangles. Triangles were, unless you knew how to play them subtly, you didn't get invited, because that's a dangerous instrument. When it's well played, it's fine. But so you usually had your core fiddle, accordion, and guitar. A couple of fiddles, sometimes a couple of guitars, but they were smaller. The jam sessions today are much larger. You may have, I've been to some recently. You have 8 or 9 fiddles, 4 or 5 guitars. It's beautiful, but it's just different. It's because it's open to the general public. You have more people participating, which is great. But back then it was more of a family and friend, a private occasion. No drums, but in the halls when you started getting the drums into play in the halls. And you started, because we followed Schultz and those guys, you still had some steel guitar involvement. You had some pretty good steel guitar players back then that picked up on it, syncopation. They knew how to choke it. It wasn't, and they weren't. Again, they were given a lead, but then they backed off. They just filled. The music is all about blending. You have to blend, and if everybody's leading at the same time, it doesn't happen. You have to blend. You have to support one another, and that's the good thing about playing acoustically. You tend to be reminded of this, and you find your place. And the fiddle players get the segonet, and your drum players he's in there blending. They're not trying to be up front. You're not trying to lead when somebody's doing vocals, and that to me is the sweet part of the music, when you're not up there competing and just blending. You're coming up with this beautiful blend of music. And electric bass was the last thing, and I have real good friends that play electric bass. I'm just not very fond of them. I find that they're just too up front, and they're just too aggressive. The players today I don't think it really blends well. It doesn't blend. And a lot of times they're doing the same thing that the drums are doing, and if you certain guitar styles, you've got 3 people doing the same thing at a different level, and I find it's just, it doesn't work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to try to wrap it up. I know it's getting late. You got things you want to do.
Sure.
As you know, there's one thing I want to talk to you about. Nathan had said, getting back to what Ben said earlier, Nathan said, when I die, I want all my records to be destroyed. You ever heard that before?
Oh yeah, he did.
And you're talking how when you travel, you said you still hear this style of music. How do you feel about Nathan's dying wishes? That's what I'm asking.
Well, he did it for a reason. It wasn't always fun and games. It was tough, and he went through a lot, and the music really took control of him, the lifestyle, and it brought some hardships on his family. You know, he paid a price, and he just felt like when he was gone, that should be the end of it. And his wife, really wanted it to be the end of it. In fact, I don't know if you remember when he died, it was a long time before they play any of Nathan's music on the radios. Mm-hmm. It was her wish to. So they didn't, and out of respect for her and for Nathan. And when she died is when they started playing Nathan's music again. Mm-hmm. And she actually kept him out of a lot of documentaries and books. She just refused to. You know, she wanted to forget it. And there was a lot of hardship there. You know, it's not just Nathan. A lot of musicians back then had some really tough times. But his music will never die. No, he's here. I'm here to tell you, he's still with us, and you know, he'll always be there. I just get so many requests to play his tunes, and people want to talk about him all the time, and they're fascinated by his music. He'll be here. Nathan Abshire will be here for a very long time.